started. Let me make sure.
Cool.
Okay. All right. Hi, everybody. Today is Thursday, October 15th, 2020. Welcome to another session of American Public Policy Redux. So glad you can join us tonight. We're going to continue, as Pat told me before we jumped in, we're going to continue with what we were discussing last week with partisan polarization. And as always, just a quick note, you can ask questions, jump in anytime. If there's a term he uses or a statement he makes that you're not quite clear or you'd like some more examples on, feel free to chat, use the chat feature to ask the question. If you would not like to be recorded, as always, these are recorded with active screen view. So if you are going to chat with your video, you will be recorded. But again, if you use the chat feature, you can ask your question. I won't mention your name and I'll just say that we received a question or a comment thereof. So that's all it, but we will have time at the end for questions as always, but always feel free to jump in if there's something you would like to understand a bit better. And that's it.
Cool, cool. It's good to see everybody. Like I said last time, you know, I'm in New Jersey, so maybe I'll be nastier on the it's you know, it's just the state culture. Okay, so this is on partisan polarization. And last time I really made an argument that Ronald Reagan's presidency started the process of partisan polarization. That was kind of sloppy. I wanted to make the point really that it's the polarization part, okay? That Ronald Reagan took the Republican Party and moved it to the right, moved it in some of the same kinds of directions that Barry Goldwater wanted to move it in 1964, but failed miserably. And Ronald Reagan managed to pull it off. He managed to move the Republican Party to the right. And again, until Donald Trump, Ronald Reagan became an icon at the Republican National Convention. Okay. Speakers at the Republican National Convention would always talk about Ronald Reagan as a revered figure in the party, sort of a touchstone. You know, we should continue to build on Ronald Reagan's vision. That's the polarization part. But we didn't get to the party strength part. Okay, so the dimension of how strong the party, I'm going to use language from my political parties and interest groups class, and I stole that from somebody else, but it's the party in the government. How strong is the party in the government? And the party in the government consists of those members of the Republican Party and the Democratic Party who hold public office. And for our purposes, we're talking about the House and the Senate, okay? So that's what I want to do. I mean, among other things, but that's what I want to do tonight, is to take a look at the development of party strength, or you can think of it as party cohesion. You know, so all the Republicans stick together, all the Democrats stick together. And I hope everybody gets it, that is an analytically distinct dimension from polarization, okay? So you could have the parties this close to each other, okay? But all the Democrats could vote together and all the Republicans could vote together. Or you could have them disparate. You can have them wildly distant from each other. Democrats are hanging together, Republicans are hanging together. Or you can have all sorts of combinations, right? Okay. And we're going to start with the Democratic Party. The issue facing the Democratic Party at that point in time pertained to those Southern Democrats. Okay. You had the segregationist Southern Democrats who were also, bless you, Paige, who were also, they were fairly conservative in terms of economic policy as well. Okay, and they were standing in the way of lots of directions that Northern Democrats wanted to go, and they could stand effectively against those initiatives because of the seniority system that existed in the House. So you would chair a committee because you are the most senior member from the majority party. And the committee chair would hold tremendous power about allowing bills to move forward, staffing, all kinds of, they had a great deal of power. I'm going to relate that to the policy making part of this, okay? That was a key part of the old model of policymaking, okay? Where policymaking was fragmented and occurred on the committee and subcommittee level. One of the reasons it could occur on the committee and subcommittee levels is that the committee chairs and the subcommittee chairs held a great deal of power in terms of what happened in that committee or the subcommittee, okay? And those positions in lots of key committees and subcommittees were held by Southern Democrats, okay? So it increased the level of frustration that Northern Democrats felt about that system, okay? I want to fill that out a little bit. You can think about that on a relatively superficial level and say, yeah, if I was a Northern Democrat, I would find that really, that would make me angry, okay? But I want to take a slightly different, I want to fill that out a little bit more, okay? If you remember, those of you who took the old public policy process, a key part concerned what's the most important thing in the world for a member of Congress? It's to get elected, to get reelected, okay? And the seminal source there was a book by David Mayhew called Congress, the Electoral Connection. Fessing up, I stole his title for my first article, which was Gender Role and Political Culture, the Electoral Connection. I wanted to make an argument that when women ran for public office, they needed to take the political culture of their district into account when they decided how to present themselves as women, okay? This was me fessing up to an act of theft, okay? Mayhew argued that you could explain or predict a great deal of a representative's behavior simply with respect to their desire to get reelected. And if you think about that, that's sort of a fundamental thing. You could, if you're a representative, you could certainly want to pursue certain policies. You can't do that if you don't get reelected, though. Okay, so at bottom, you always needed to worry about reelection. So I want you to think about those Northern Democrats in that way. This means that they were continually thwarted in their attempt to get policies through the policymaking process that would satisfy people in their district because those darned Southern Democrats were sitting in the way, okay? In other words, it endangered the most important thing in the world to those Northern Democrats, the ability to get reelected, okay? What you wanted to do was, when you went into the system, when you joined the House, you wanted to get assigned to the appropriate committees that dealt with policy matters most germane to folks in your district, so they would care about those benefits and then deliver the benefits, okay? Um, I want you to notice that that would be regardless of party, okay? Didn't matter whether you were a Democrat or Republican. If you could be a Democrat or a Republican, but if you were from a farming district, you would probably want to get benefits for the farmers in your district. And party didn't matter, okay? Well, if you had, again, Southern Democrats who stood in the way of that, you would be unable to do that. I kind of want to make a couple of points there. One, this is a system in which party really didn't matter that much, okay? And it really facilitated members of the House getting reelected. And indeed, they were reelected at like 95, 90%, 97% of the time, okay? And the way that you want to think about those policies is in very, very concrete material terms, not in terms of like morality policies, right? Ideological stuff, but really nuts and bolts things. So price supports for peanut farmers, okay? If I'm from a district that has lots of peanut farmers, I want to raise price supports to provide a benefit to those constituents in my district. Doesn't matter whether I'm a Republican or a Democrat, okay? That's what that whole policymaking system was based on. And it minimized the amount of conflict because party didn't matter. If you were representing similar kinds of folks, then you could find common cause, you could pass the policy, you could deliver the benefits, and you could get reelected. And that way, you know, everybody gets to keep their Georgetown brownstones. Okay, everybody stays happy. They get to keep going back to Washington. Okay. Constituents are happy. They vote for the incumbent. The incumbent goes there, and you just keep going on and on and on. The system just keeps going along. However, those Southern Democrats kept bottling things up in certain key areas for years. In other words, and this is going to become important when we talk about Republicans. I think it's important to understand that the House and the Senate are personal, social environments. People get the sort of personal connections and the nature of the social life within the institution, it matters, okay? If a certain set of representatives continually frustrates you in what you're trying to accomplish, you're going to hate them. You're going to develop, there's an emotional resentment that is not totally rational. There's certainly a rational kernel to it. They're stopping you from delivering benefits to your constituents. I want you to appreciate that there is an emotional level to it as well, okay? That matters and potentially leads to not the most irrational, not the most rational behavior because you're so angry and frustrated at the system. Okay. And then Richard Milhouse Nixon screws it all up and you get Watergate, okay? Not only does he resign, but he also absolutely destroys the Republican Party for the 1974 midterms. The 1974 midterms are a bloodbath for the Republican Party, okay? On the other side, they're kind of a bloodbath for the Southern Democrats because the Democrats make their inroads in northern districts that had been Republican. Segregationists in the South weren't going to leave the Democratic Party. Okay? But you then change the balance of power within the Democratic Party. So now the Northern Democrats didn't need those damn Southern Democrats. They could get things done on their own. And you also got brand new representatives in those Northern districts who were Democrats, who were also pretty darn liberal. Okay? And they start changing the rules. And the main thing involves the end of the straight up seniority rule. To give the Speaker of the House, the majority party's leader in the House, some power about assigning chair positions on the committees. And it didn't have to be seniority. So lots of those Southern Democratic committee chairs got bumped. Okay? You moved away from a purely seniority-based system to a system in which party leadership has more power. Here's where we're getting to the strength of the party. In formal terms, members of the House majority party ceded power to the Speaker. They thereby centralized party power within the body. Okay, that's a change. I want you to see this. This means you have strengthened the formal party organization in the House, because you've given the Speaker greatly enhanced powers. Okay, does that make sense at all?
The Democrats that were elected post Nixon were the ones to make that change.
Yeah.
In Congress, as far as the rules.
Say hi, Jody. This is my brother-in-law.
I was hosting Pat for this last week, and it's been great. So I hope you guys are enjoying yourself. And I thought I'd come up and say hello.
Here's the question, but before he leaves, he actually sat in on one of my public policy classes when my younger daughter Caitlin was getting married. Were any of you in that class? Anybody? Oh, this is kind of disappointing, because he showed up, and my best friend from Kentucky also showed up, and each one of them tried to embarrass me in front of the class. So I thought it'd be fun but nobody?
We were unsuccessful in embarrassing him because that's impossible. So there you go. All right, you go back to it.
All right.
Nice to meet all of you. Enjoy.
Hi.
Yeah, it will. That was.
I was about to say, come back. Tell us an embarrassing story, since we all missed it. But I didn't want to prolong, so that's okay.
Well, it was actually a great deal of fun, because, and I told Jody that the reason I appreciated it was really difficult getting little undergraduate babies to understand that I enjoyed having you guys poke fun at me. And they did it. They like modeled the behavior I wanted to see from more of you guys. And it made the class even more fun, because there was sort of more joking around, and yeah.
And I learned very early on in my marriage that that's how New Jerseyans show that they love you, or at least those that I've met. They like to razz you a lot, and you have to roll with it.
Yeah, and actually, my best friend who's in Kentucky is from New Jersey. We're still trying to figure out how a Californian and a New Jersey ended up in Indiana and Kentucky, because that's just wrong. That's just, anyway.
So Democrats are the ones responsible for making the change to put more power into the hands of the Speaker and the leadership.
Absolutely,
okay.
Absolutely. And one of the ways that you then see centralized power in the House is because the Speaker controls the Rules Committee. And certainly those of you who've been in Washington, D.C. know why the Rules Committee matters so much. I'm not going to go into all the kinds of things the rules committee can do. But think of it this way, if any game that you play, if you could write the rules any way that you wanted, you could virtually ensure any outcome you wanted. Okay? So this enabled the Speaker of the House indirectly to make sure that they could get whatever outcome they wanted. I'm overstating the case, but I want you to appreciate just how much power the Speaker then held in formal terms. Not every speaker was going to use those powers to their fullest. But you see the beginnings of that centralized power, that centralized party power, as a result of the 1974 midterms. Okay? And I think fairly obviously, when you've done that, oops, I'm working in a smaller space this week. When you do that, you've also created some incentives for the minority party to hang together more tightly, right? Because they're now confronting a more unified opposition party, okay? All right. But in terms of actually putting it into effect, it really doesn't happen for a little while. If I name, I will name the speakers of the House, kind of leading out of that period, and they're characters like Carl Albert and Tip O'Neill. Okay, neither one of these guys really attempted to rule the House with an iron fist. Okay. The really dramatic increase in the use of the tools held by the Speaker of the House happens with Newt Gingrich. Okay. And this is me throwing a bone to Jen Odell. I'm really disappointed in the Congress class. How many of you took the Congress class? Oh, come on. Somebody had to take the Congress class. Nobody? The big assignment there that I stole from another friend of mine was you do a case study of a member of the House, whoever you wanted. Way back in the late 80s, I had a student, actually she was from Atlanta, who did her case study on Newt Gingrich. And somewhere in my files, I still have that paper because it was really good. And she'd analyzed Newt Gingrich's career and how he was behaving in the House. And she correctly predicted that this was a guy who had tremendous ambition. She noted one of the things, this really was a great paper. This student really did an excellent job. One of the things to take a look at is how much does the representative pay attention to providing services to their constituency, and how much effort do they exercise in moving up the ranks. And Nudie was not really paying that much attention to his constituency, and he had a series of relatively close re-election votes. Okay. She sort of correctly predicted this is a guy who wants to move up and wants to gain more power. So here comes the contract with America. And again, I want to go back. This is in the 1990s. The Republicans are, it's hard to imagine. This is decades of feeling like you're in the wilderness. where you can't get anything done, that the Democrats stop you from doing anything that you want to do. They're using the Rules Committee to make sure that your proposals go nowhere and that their proposals get passed. I appreciate decades of feeling like you're in the wilderness, okay? That emotional kind of orientation, that feeling, is key to understanding what happens next, okay? So Nudie comes up with this idea, is going to do a contract with America. You do understand this is like the lazy boys approach to a party platform. Okay. There are a couple of, I mean, there's one key article about party platforms, and the title starts out, "If elected, I promise." That's key. That's at the heart of the democratic quality, with a little d, the democratic quality. It's not nudie, it's newty. The democratic quality of party platforms, okay? The problem is that, and you know, Gingrich realizes that nobody believes that. Everybody believes that party platforms are a sham. They're wrong, but it doesn't matter. If the public believes something, it doesn't matter that they're wrong. You trade on that. You take advantage of the fact that they believe that party platforms are a sham. And you bring up this thing called the contract with America, and ordinary citizens are thinking, wow, this is great. Then the party's really accountable. And people like me want to say, you idiot. This has been going on every 4 years. Where in the world were you? Again, it doesn't matter. That's why he's in office and I'm not, among other reasons. So how many of you took a look at the party, at the contract with America, or have some familiarity with it? It's not heavy reading. It's not voluminous. It's really, really short. It's incredibly easy to understand for the most part. And he then had Republican candidates sign on to the contract with America so that it kind of looked like a party platform, right? You get all the Republicans who are running for election in particularly the House to sign on this thing. So all the Republicans are going to say, if elected, we promise to do these things that are laid out in the contract with America. And the Republicans win the House in 1994. Now, put all those things together that I just mentioned. And put yourself in the position of being one of those Republican members of the House. You freaking love Newt Gingrich. You've been in the wilderness for decades, and Newty has brought you out of the wilderness into majority party status in the House. Now you can finally get things done that you want to get done, right? You are grateful. You're willing to cede power to Gingrich because he saved you from oblivion. You know, now you're in majority party status. Well, Newt's willing to take advantage of this because he, in case you haven't been able to tell, Newt Gingrich has overwhelming personal ambition. I'm convinced it's one of the reasons that he bonded with Bill Clinton. That both of them have such overweening political ambition that they sort of understood one another, okay? By God, he took advantage of it. And he went ahead and used those levers of power that had been sort of laid out as a result of the 1974. So you're talking 20 years earlier, right? But the opportunity now existed. Gingrich took advantage of the opportunity. Okay. All right. So who wants to know the backstory on the contract with America? This is the, how many of you ever heard of the name Frank Luntz? Frank Luntz supposedly had data demonstrating public support for all the planks in the contract with America. And whenever Newt Gingrich approached a Republican candidate, Frank Luntz, who was a very respected pollster, would provide the evidence. The public supports this. In other words, you can get elected if you support this stuff because the public supports it. Skeptical journalists asked to see his data. He said, belongs to the party. I can't give you that. The upshot is he made up the data. There wasn't any evidence that the public supported the planks of the contract with America. He just made it up. To my knowledge, he is the only person ever censured by APOR, which is the American Association of Public Opinion Researchers. You're getting to my point, Michelle. You're getting my point. No, that's cool. He's the only person I know who's been censured by the professional association. I want you to think just half a moment about the ethics of pollsters. Oh, come on, somebody should be laughing. And yet, he's the only one. In other words, he committed the most egregious ethical violations for a pollster. And you're right, he's still out there. He's still getting interviewed by idiot journalists who don't hold him accountable. I'm just big on accountability. He should have to crawl into a cave somewhere and never again enter into public life in America. You should, I don't care what party you are. I want you to put yourself in the position of those Republicans who are running for office. How dare that guy lie to you and tell you that there's support for something that didn't exist and thereby manipulate you into signing on to that contract. How dare he do that? Okay.
Is that just well known among the academic community, or is that known? Okay.
It's not it's not well known. I mean, look, I think a couple of you have already pointed out that, you've spotted him. He shows up. I saw him quoted in, they did a Washington Post article on a focus group he did looking at undecided voters responding to the debate.
Yeah,
No.
I think it was the vice presidential debate. He was on CNN because I was flipping to see which channels covered what, and they had him, and I remember you mentioning him from another session, and I looked at my notes, I was like, no.
Yeah.
Is that the same guy? It is.
Yeah, same guy. Don't do that. Don't. I mean, do y'all get it? Again, it doesn't matter whether you're a Democrat or Republican. That's unethical behavior that took advantage of everybody, regardless of partisan affiliation. Regardless, it was absolutely soulless for him to do that. Actually, a friend of Jody's was a college buddy of Frank Luntz. And I met him, and he was absolutely unrepentant as well. There's something about, I'm going to get myself in trouble. There's something about U of Penn grads. There's something about, there's an Ivy League thing going on there that, anyway. All right. So let's get to the part that really matters for what we're talking about. Newt Gingrich then takes control of those levers of power that have been established when the Democrats turn over in 1974 with a vengeance. Okay. So I'm not even going to go through the whole host of things that he did. I want to give you one illustration of how he exercised power. I'm going to give a couple. He certainly didn't really care about seniority. He moved the most loyal Republicans, most loyal to him Republicans, into committee chair positions. But even that wasn't good enough. If they didn't produce the policy that he wanted, he would form an ad hoc committee to produce the bill that he wanted. And that would become the bill that the House would address. Are y'all getting how that would then really, really tick off Republicans? Okay. Well, Newt was exercising remarkable power in the House. In a relatively short period of time, he didn't have many friends on the Republican side. He certainly didn't have them on the Democrat side, but he also didn't have them on the Republican side. So when he faced some ethics charges about a course he was teaching, I will let you do but he faced ethics charges in the House, and his Republican colleagues let that old boy just twist in the wind. Republicans did not, it was an overwhelming vote against him on those ethics charges. Okay. A majority of Republicans voted to support those ethics charges against Newt Gingrich. But here's the deal. That then established a template that became available for speakers of the House onward. So that's the big deal, right? We now have a situation where the formal powers of the party in the House have dramatically increased. Okay, and you've seen it in action. Okay. The Senate is just a different animal, and the framers intended it to be a different animal. Yeah, what the heck? I'm gonna go ahead and do this. This is my Roman political theory offering for you guys, because that's what the framers really relied on, Roman political thought and Roman Republican thought. The framers really thought the president embodied a monarchical principle, that the Senate embodied an aristocratic principle, and that the House embodied a democratic principle. And what they wanted to do was, believing that pure forms of democracy, aristocracy, and monarchy would deteriorate, they advocated for a mixed constitution. And you can see it in the Roman Republic, okay? So that means they saw the Senate as a collection of aristocrats, not in a pejorative term, in a positive way, that these would be thoughtful, contemplative individuals who should be allowed their judgment, and all of whom should be brought into the discussion. Okay? And another way of thinking about it, they thought of the Senate as the body that would cool the passions that you would witness in the House. You're going to slow things down in the Senate. And so individual senators, not just minorities, individual senators have remarkable sort of veto powers to just stop things. Okay, maybe not permanently, but at least temporarily stop things. Powers that don't exist in the House. As a result, there's no way the majority leader in the Senate is ever going to accrue the formal powers held by the Speaker of the House. Okay? So what we've witnessed in the Senate over time, in terms of, let's jump to the chase here. Mitch McConnell, it's not that Mitch McConnell has these amazing formal powers, right, in terms of running the Senate. What we're seeing there has to do with polarization, not party strength. Okay? Make sense, y'all? Okay. Yeah, let me trot out some Democratic majority leaders that preceded Mitch McConnell. Robert, you know what? As I get each one of them, if you recognize the name, raise your hand. And you weenies who don't have your cameras on, but if you're there, raise your hand if you recognize the name. Robert Byrd. Oh, that's cool, Leslie. I like that. That's cool. So Robert Byrd, George Mitchell. Most of you probably don't know George Mitchell. Name. Tom Daschle from Dakota, and Harry Reid. Okay, those are Democratic Senate majority leaders. There's not a liberal in the bunch. There's not. Harry Reid didn't support abortion rights. Okay, he didn't support gay marriage until after he'd left the office. All of those kinds of social issues that were there. No, they were. Robert Byrd's from West Virginia, for crying out loud. How in the world is that a hotbed of liberalism? Right? So you really didn't see that kind of party strength in the Senate, sort of pushing the party's perspective into effect. Okay? But polarization did the job. It wasn't formal power that resulted in a system where where Mitch McConnell could have he could hold his entire party together no matter what. Okay? It's the polarization part that did it. So
Pat, can you explain that? Because I don't really understand the distinction when you say McConnell is holding things together based on polarization and not party strength. I don't understand that.
By party strength, I mean formal powers. He doesn't have any formal powers that enables him. Like, he's not. You can kind of watch how he's handling this Supreme Court nomination. Right? He's not wielding any formal powers. Okay? He's engaging in persuasion. Sure, persuasion is not formal. Okay?
Formal being structural.
Right.
But Pat, is it a distinction without a difference? I mean, he's holding the Republicans. The Republicans are all in line.
Yeah.
And they're all Republicans, and whether it's polarization or party, isn't it the same effect? The effect is the same.
It looks like the same thing, but I think, again, the object is understanding, right? And so if you want to understand why that situation exists in the Senate, you need to know it's not that he has formal powers. It's that the parties have gotten so polarized. And then if you then look forward, right? Because that's that's like a lot of what you want to do. Like, what do we do in the future? How do we do? Well, if you understand that it's polarization, not kind of structural things in the Senate, then you go about addressing that problem in a different way. Okay. That's really what I'm doing.
Yeah,
So
I'm not sure the terminology is that clear, but yeah, I understand it once you defined it. Okay.
polarization is the distance between the parties. Okay. And how tightly clustered they are. Party strength has to do with formal powers that the party has within the given institution. Okay, so you could, if you had Newt in the House, could force Republicans to go along with him because he had powers that could enable him to really, really punish them. Okay, that doesn't exist in the Senate. You know, Mitch McConnell doesn't have the ability to punish senators in a way that even remotely resembles what Newt Gingrich could do in the House. Okay, so the dynamic that gets you there differs and differs in a really significant kind of way. If you don't make the distinction, that means you don't understand the difference between the House and the Senate. Okay, they're different kinds of bodies, and you need to address what may be the same situation in different ways. And because I know that there's a lot of you want to go in that direction, like, okay, there are all these things going on, we think they're harmful, then let's be thoughtful about explaining and understanding exactly what we have. Okay, and so you want to know the difference between, you can look at it and you can just look at the votes and say, well, shoot, the votes look similar between the House and the Senate. Well, yeah, but you got there on different avenues. Okay, that's the point that I want to make. And I'm not even clear, I'm not sure where it goes in the future. I do know it matters. Okay, that if you don't see that distinction, you will fail in designing remedies to the situation. Okay, all right. We're going to trip the light fantastic again. We're gonna try this, and that is, I have a video. Let's see if we can do this, that I'm going to share with you. Okay, everybody got it? All right. So I'm gonna, yeah, here's what I'm gonna do. I have no idea what they put hang on. So the House is on the left, the Senate's on the right, and the dates are up top. What you have is a measure that two political scientists came up with, Keith Poole and Howard Rosenthal, and it's called DW-nominate. This is one of the coolest things that political scientists have come up with, because it measures the ideology of members of the House and members of the Senate based on the roll call votes, but in a way that enables you to make comparisons across space, right, between these two institutions, and over time. So you can compare the ideology along, there are a couple of dimensions here. One of them is the main one, the liberal conservative. You can compare that over time. So you can go back to like 19th century and compare to current folks. I'm going to point out academics are always sniping at each other. If you can find a flaw in somebody's measure or somebody's research, other scholars are all over that stuff, because then they can publish some more articles. They can enhance they can get promoted. They can make more money. There are all kinds of incentives for beating up on it. Nobody has really challenged this method. In other words, they came up with this marvelously valid way of measuring ideology in the House and the Senate over time. Okay? I like this. It'll take a couple of minutes to go through here, but because it's a video and it shows movement over time. Okay? So here we go. Sorry about the music. Main thing is notice lots of overlap between the parties. So you're getting with Civil War, real polarization. Okay, see the muddling again? And just think left to right. Look at that. I'm sorry. Look at that overlap. Okay. See it starting to separate. Notice in both bodies, you have a lot of polarization. You do have more on the House side than the Senate, right? There we All right. And we're back. If you take a look at that movement on the Democratic side, the movement of the Democratic side on that liberal side isn't really moving folks who are Democrats farther to the left. It's all of the Southern Democrats moving over to the other side. Okay? On the Republican side, it moved farther to the conservative side. And part of that was that you know those Southern Democrats were in many cases more conservative. Okay. So that's going on. Here's what's missing. And this is the part where you're going to have to kind of take me at my word. In the last few years, they came up with a way of applying this measure to presidents. Okay, and it has to do with connecting actions of the president with roll call votes that are taken in the House and the Senate. Okay, and they call it a square wave because they're not able to do it. You know, they're doing it for like terms. Okay. If you, their website got hacked. Their website got hacked. And so if you go to, it's voteview.com, right, Michelle? Yeah. Or if you Google up a thing about VoteView presidential square wave, you'll get their blog post on that. You'll scroll down and there will be the caption, click image to enlarge, and there's nothing there. It's gone. So like that's why I say you're gonna have to take me at my word on this. Here's the remarkable thing. Democratic presidents did not get more liberal. They didn't. Clinton and Obama are more conservative than Harry freaking Truman. Harry Truman supported what some folks would call right now socialized medicine. Obama didn't do that. Clinton didn't do that. Okay. Here's where you'll see movement. You see among Republican presidents, you think Dwight Eisenhower, really moderate, okay? But when you get to Ronald Reagan, there's a bump up, and he's significantly more conservative than previous Republican presidents. When you get to George W. Bush, he gets even more conservative than Ronald Reagan. Okay? I want you to put all this stuff together. Presidents, this is Sean's career. Presidents lead political parties. Okay? What you saw was Reagan leading the Republican Party to the right. Okay? He's got 2 terms in office. And it changes that party. It changes the agenda, it changes the issue positions, it changes the recruitment of candidates. Moderate Republicans stopped running for the Republican nomination for seats in the House and the Senate. If they didn't agree with Ronald Reagan, they were less likely to join the party. To a lesser degree, you see that happening in the Senate. That process accelerates with George W. Bush, where you have the recruitment of ever more conservative candidates running for the Republican nomination, again, for the House or for the Senate. There's some marginal changes on the Democratic side as well, but it's not getting led by Democratic presidents. It's in reaction to what's happening on the Republican side. Okay? So if you want to see what's going on in terms of partisan polarization, Ronald Reagan, George W. Bush, moving the Republican Party much significantly farther to the right than other Republican presidents. And that's the engine behind it. You certainly have Democrats responding, but not initiating that process as well, and not to the degree that often it gets charged in, like, some media kinds of accounts. I mean, the big change on the Democratic side was getting rid of the Southern segregationists in the party. It wasn't they became wild-eyed leftist radicals. It was getting rid of the segregationists who then went over to the Republican Party. And during the Reagan administration, you saw a number of Democrats in the House resign and run again as Republicans. Okay. Yeah, that's sort of how I wanted. I'm now, things are getting wild downstairs. So can you hear any of that? There, that's sort of how I wanted to wrap it up. Again, I'm really sorry I don't have. I mean, nobody has it. That those presidential square waves are really cool to take a look at. And even for somebody who studies politics, I think a lot of political scientists were surprised to see where the presidents ended up getting laid out in terms of ideology. Okay. But I'm gonna stop it there. Anybody wants to jump in, and are there things that confuse you? You want me to go over them some more? You've got problems with?
Well, one thing I just wanted to say is well, you mentioned that W is so conservative, and it's true, and that he was leading the party, but at the same time, we also know that Dick Cheney was so powerful at that time in terms of that role of the president. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is that yes, the president holds power, but there's also these influences that can be occurring within the party, right? Outside of that, kind of impact that role that the president has.
Yeah, yeah, I think that mattered for the policymaking process, but in terms of moving members of the House and the Senate out to the right, that's pretty much all W, to move it out in that direction. And of course, it also gets like really ugly when the Tea Party comes in, and you know, you can, I don't know what you all want to do with the Tea Party, but you know, you could see that as kind of the logical development of the party and where it was going, and certainly there's been that kind of libertarian aspect of the Republican Party ever since certainly since Ronald Reagan. You know, Ron Paul, Rand Paul, right? Straight up libertarians. You know, so that's been within the party. But the whole House Freedom Caucus, Tea Party kind of thing, that's kind of more coming out of that progression from Reagan to W.
I was wondering if I had a question, and then Adrienne, I wanted her to pop in for a minute or two because she sent me an awesome note earlier. But with the contract for America, with him aligning the party in this contract, did it cause any Republicans to not become elected because it forced them into positions that they maybe were not comfortable with, or their constituents didn't agree with, whereas they would have been elected otherwise?
That's a great question. I don't know that anybody's really looked at it. I was kind of, you know, that's a good question. I was, just because I really hate Frank Luntz. I wanted to go at it from the ethical point of view, but that's not an unreasonable question. It was just, if you think about it in the way that a Republican candidate would, okay? Oh, come on, nobody. It was a big win. We went from minority to majority party status. What could have been wrong with the contract with America? It must be a great thing. It got us to majority party status. So even if it's not true, and it's not clear that it is, it can kind of work that way psychologically for those Republican members of the House. But you're not wrong. I mean, I think that's a good question. I just, it would also be difficult to test empirically, right? It's unclear how you'd build a model to test that empirically.
Well, I was wondering if maybe like it was so general. I just wondering maybe it was so general that it was able to cover a majority, or that your constituents would take, 9 out of 10. Like,
Yeah. And you know what? Let's use the stuff that we talked about earlier, right? So how much do you think ordinary citizens knew about the contract with America? They didn't know squat. It was more that idea that, oh my God, the Republicans are willing to promise to do these things if they're elected. It was the Democratic symbol that Gingrich could use that ordinary voters could find attractive. And they they moved forward and they tried to get stuff done on virtually every one of the planks in the contract with America. So that, yeah, I mean, that's fine. Just don't lie about your data.
Adrian wrote her senior thesis on the implosion of the 1994 House Republican Revolution and interned at the NRCC in the spring of '98, she says. So I was wondering if she could pop in here for a minute or two.
Run with it, Adrian.
So I'll put it out there that I wrote my senior thesis based on my semester in Washington, D.C., which under Pat's umbrella was definitely not a quantitative, methodical, statistical senior thesis.
That's okay. It's okay.
Right. And I spend a lot of time in data science now, so I'm constantly making sure that caveat's in place.
Yes.
So my senior thesis was inspired by the book "Tell Newt to Shut Up," right, by Michael Weisskopf and David Moranis. And then I got an internship at the National Republican Congressional Committee in 1998. And part of that was helping to create the candidate campaign school that they did for the 1998 House candidates, the first ones coming out of the gate. And that started in the 1992 and 1994 congressional races where Newt Gingrich and his team used that arm of the party to train novice candidates on how to be congressional candidates, ushering in the wave from 1994, right? What was fascinating to me was being that close to the kinds of players that took everything for their playbooks from that 1994 Republican Revolution. At the time is what they described it, right?
Yeah.
Frank Luntz was there actually as a part of the agenda, along with others, right?
Of course he was, yeah.
You know, guidance on how to do a great campaign ad, how to create a financial budget. And so all of that was a part of that experience. So even in 1998, which being an intern, the spring semester after the Monica Lewinsky scandal was not as much fun as it probably was before that. It did give me a whole lot of insight into what they were still trying to do. And they thought all of that still worked in terms of how to get Republicans who weren't really comfortable with talking points to speak to the pillars. And every conversation came back to the contract with America was the foundation for success, even though in a lot of ways, the bluster of coming in 94 imploded rather quickly once the alliance between the deficit hawks and the defense spending team all kind of looked at the pillars of the contract with America and realized that they were going to be on opposite sides of some of these discussions. And Newt couldn't keep them all together because their loyalty was based a little too much on self-interest and less about Newt was the only guy that could go ahead and solve the problem, right? As a Republican, it was fascinating exploration. It put me in a completely different perspective. But, you know, I was just so excited you were talking about this tonight because it's like, oh my gosh, I had to go back into myself. I almost pulled my senior thesis out of my box because I don't have it on my 3 1/4 floppies to read anymore.
Good old days with the
But it was you know, it was nice.
Yeah, and I think that folks on the outside don't understand the way that candidates generally don't understand what gets them elected. They really don't. They really don't. My favorite story was actually when I first got out to St. Mary's, they didn't have anybody who could count to 10, you know, so I was their statistics guy, but they had contacts with local candidates. So there was the guy who was running for the House race, and he had hired some really incompetent group to run a survey for him. It wasn't a random sample. It was garbage. It was absolute garbage. But they also didn't know how to analyze the data. So my colleagues at that time, well, some of you knew Dick Brisbane.
Yep.
Dick was here then, but Craig Hartzer, who left earlier, he was really wired in to the Democratic Party in the air. So he got us connected, and we thought we were going to be like a polling business. St. Mary's doesn't pay you too much, but if you can make some money on the side, what the heck. So I looked at the results, and I analyzed them, and I actually gave them a series of pieces of advice of strategy, and they were targeted to different parts of the district. I also noted that they couldn't generalize from those results to the district as a whole because it wasn't a random sample. And it was, I think they had like equal numbers of folks from each one of the counties, and the counties were really disparate and it was a horrible sample. Years later, I'm on jury duty in Mishawaka, and this guy is there at the courthouse. We finished the case that we're dealing with, and he comes up and introduces himself to me and says, "You guys did great work. The results on that poll were so close to the final election returns." I'm not in the business of pulling the wings off flies, so I let him live with that. But they don't know. So, and political consultants take advantage of this. If you're a political consultant, you want to be running a campaign that was going to win anyway, and then take credit for it. Now, if you're dumbass lucky and you pick a campaign and most people think it's not going to succeed, but you think it can, well, that's even better. But it's not clear that you actually caused that person to win the election. It doesn't matter. If you can connect yourself to a victory, you can market that to candidates. Newt Gingrich marketed that to candidates, okay? In an important way, George W. Bush and Karl Rove marketed stuff to Republican candidates, okay? And in ways that I think have harmed the Republican Party. Because what Karl Rove was doing was saying, we don't need to broaden our appeal. We don't need to address, these other groups who have been neglected. But my God, we're gonna get out the vote like crazy. And he was incredibly expert at getting turnout among the Republican Party base. That's fine for W. It hasn't been good for the Republican Party now. Because
the foundation of that was actually even baked into and came from, in a lot of ways, the get out the vote efforts that were done in the 1992 and 1994 House races, right? So that get out the vote methodology that Rove was a part of was actually, baked into a House strategy and a Senate strategy first, and then they raised that to the presidential level. Yeah. Some could argue that David Plouffe did the same thing in terms of taking Democratic turnout over 2004, 2006, 2000, and then translating that in 2008 to a presidential strategy, because that was statistically amazing in 2008 in terms of the get out the vote effort for Obama as well, right? So there was that ushering of utilizing targeted statistical analysis at lower levels that just blew that up. So I could
Yeah,
talk about this all day.
and I'm not, I mean, the guy on the Democratic side that I think hasn't gotten enough credit, and now I'm not going to remember his name. Howard Dean? Doing a 50 state strategy for the Democratic Party organization. Like Indiana, believe it or not, voted for Obama his first time, the first time since 1964 that Indiana had gone Democratic. And that has really resonated. It's had an impact in succeeding elections, but not as much as it should, and not as much as Rove's work did. On the Republican side, that's really guided the Republican Party and Republican Party candidates since that time in a way that Howard Dean's strategy, I don't think they adequately appreciated what a great idea that was. And and in that one, you benefit from the fact that, look, you only have so far to go with the turnout of certain groups. Turnout among African Americans and minorities, if you can boost the turnout there, that can make a huge difference. Okay, you boost that a few points, you can really make a big difference. Old white guys are already voting, so on the Republican side, Karl Rove's strategy, in the end, they have to deal with the fact that old white guys die. And they're not going to be around for that much longer. That's a sort of short-term kind of thing. The problem the Democrats have had on that turnout thing is that the distrust of African Americans for whites, even sympathetic whites, is so profound that they're only going to turn out in large numbers for an African American candidate. And it can't be the vice president. Like Kamala Harris is not going to shoot turnout among African Americans through the roof. She's not. It's just not. And as sympathetic as a lot of the African American community, particularly at an elite level, is toward Joe Biden, yeah, you're not going to see turnout like you saw with Obama's first election. You're just not. Other stuff.
So Pat, I have a question, and I know none of us are prognosticators, but I think it's probably why Michelle wanted to do this in the beginning. But we say that history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. And so I'm thinking, do we have anything from our past history that resembles what's going on now with this election and the partisan polarization that helps us figure out whether we're going to move to some different system than the two that we've already discussed, or some other or going back to an original system? Does it correct itself ever, assuming that we think the old one was better? It's interesting to me thinking about that 1974 election. I don't see it if that's similar to this, meaning if Nixon and Trump are a little bit similar, though I don't know that we really think that that's the case, then we would still continue forward with the model that you just described, which is the change of power and the way that the power has changed in the Congress. I'm just curious, like future looking, if anything in history tells us what could happen.
Yeah, Trump is just different. Even though on the level of the mass public, it's not as though ordinary citizens are ideological in the sense that they have informed issue positions and they think about issues and they think about ideology. At least on the elite level, that the polarization that occurred periodically in the past, particularly at times of what's called partisan realignment, that was issue-based. That was solidly issue-based. This is not issue-based. And so you don't, you know, he's an autocrat, and he relies on sort of a cult of personality, and wants, whenever he's making claims, it's not about a policy, it's about his accomplishment. So when you pull him out, that means it's a transient quality, right? If it was an issue, the issue could endure. But if you pull Trump out, there's nothing about Trump in an issue sense, in a coherent issue sense, that endures. So, you know, if and when Trump loses the presidency, I see that as a time of really great flux and unpredictability. It's just unclear. And for most of the recent era, I think the much more interesting party to look at is the Republican Party. How does the Republican Party deal with this situation? The challenges that the Republican Party has faced from the Tea Party, from House Freedom Caucus, from Donald Trump, have made it really, really hard to build a strong party that can thrive and exist in the long term. The two-party system depends upon their ability, on the Republicans' ability to do just that, to find a way out of this mess and to build a party that isn't held captive by those forces. But it's unclear, and that'll only happen with Republican Party leadership. That will only happen with whom Republicans nominate to run. The heavy lifting will have to be done by that individual. It's huge. It's huge. And the damage that Donald Trump has done to the country is enormous, but the damage that he's done to the Republican Party is really, really significant. It's just going to be a struggle for Republicans to figure out how to move forward. And I hope that folks who are Republicans understand when folks who are Democrats say we endorse the two-party system and it's important we have two strong parties, that we're not just blowing smoke, that we really mean it. That you want negotiation. You want, in some sense, some of the elements of that old policymaking process. You want negotiation and compromise. You want deliberation. You want information brought to bear. You don't want it to be driven by emotional, ideological battles. You don't. But you need different points of view. And you need strong voices on both sides. Okay. And the hope is that, and a number of you have talked about this a few times, like what about moderate voices? Well then, what can we do to deal with a system that seems to be producing more extreme alternatives that show up on the ballot? Okay. When the greatest fear of a member of Congress is not losing to the other party, but getting primaried. You know, those kinds of things could help build two strong parties that nonetheless weren't so polarized. And I'm going to come back to, you know, when Ann and I were going back and forth about the party strength and polarization, it's having those two things in mind. They're analytically distinct, and you want to think about each one of them. And the polarization matters if you want to start thinking about the nomination process. Okay? The party strength matters when you start thinking about what sorts of rules do we want in the House? What sorts of rules do we want in the Senate? And you need to do both of those kinds of things, I think, or at least think about it. Does that help make, particularly Ann, does that make a little more sense of where I was going before?
Well, it's certainly a lot more hopeful than you left the last time we were talking about moderate Republicans. Because last time we were talking about moderates as like, there's no hope. The polarization is so strong. But I agree with you, as we had said, is that, and that was my point when we were talking about it, is that it will need that strong voice that can pull, because I will always contend that the majority of Americans that identify themselves as Republican are not those that are the extreme, that identify them as middle America, and will respond to someone that is more moderate, that has that voice. It's just, they're not the loudest, and they don't have their spokesperson.
Well, let's be really careful about this, okay? Instead of saying they're not going to be the loudest, they won't dictate primary results. And as long as we use primaries to elect candidates, you have the potential for those more extreme members of both parties to dictate the outcomes. That's where I was going in terms of, you know, the nomination process. Does that make sense, Michelle?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially when they're seeing success. I mean, the current members of Congress see success with their methods. Of course, they're going to continue to replicate it in the primary process. If that continues to get them elected, they're going to continue to do so. So it's that further uphill climb that a moderate has. So
I guess I don't. So I understand what we're talking about, but I don't necessarily see the path from where we are now to less polarization. And I do agree with Michelle, and I think really it's true for both many Republicans and Democrats. People are more sort of in the middle. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, again, we talked about the strong party affiliation, and you know, and that many people don't care about the policies, but they associate with the ideology and the values, you know, and ignoring the policy. So I guess I don't see what the path is.
Well, that was why I thought it was kind of funny that Michelle thought I was being more hopeful.
Yeah, that's because I was like, I'm not seeing the hopefulness. I mean, Michelle, I'm hoping to see this, but I don't see.
No. I don't know that it was hopeful. I was identifying things that I believe are important for us to move forward. And I'll go down that path just one more step. It may well be that the primaries are horrible. And if we really want to give more moderate voices a chance, we need to use caucuses. I'm going to tell you right now, there's no way in hell you're going to get people to support caucuses. Yeah. The primaries look to the naive, superficial observer to be more democratic with a little d. Looks that way, right? We get a direct voice in the selection of our party's nominee. Well, the problem is that you've been sloppy about your use of the pronoun we, right? Because it's an incredibly low level of turnout in those primaries. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because at the present moment, the notion that anybody would trust lower level folks in the party organization to make a decision about who should be the nominee, it's not going to happen, right? I mean, big changes need to occur there. And yet, personally, I don't see, if you're going to have primaries, I don't see how you strengthen moderate voices that way. You know,
Yeah.
I just don't.
But I mean, you have to think about, we've been talking about the power of, like we talked about Reagan, right? And the power of Reagan's message, you know, I mean, and how he pulled people together around a common set of, I don't know, values or however you want to express it. And I feel like
rhetoric.
Yeah, I mean, and anyway, there's a lot behind that we could go into, but I feel like today, I'm going to say this, but I'm like, maybe this is not so true. You know, if we don't have any voices, like any leadership voices that are representing kind of a more common view or more moderate view, we just don't have them. We have the extremes.
Yeah.
And even if someone might be a little bit more moderate, I mean, at least on the Dem side, I mean, everybody on the Dem side is pretty much labeled as a communist or a socialist from the Republicans.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that's Trump, but it wasn't just Trump. It was there a little bit before. So it really, in a way, anyway, I feel like there's part of this is like the environment that we're in terms of communication and I don't know if it's quite propaganda, but things are just said, they're just not true.
Yeah.
And it distorts everything. It distorts everything. And people love it. Like you were saying,
right,
Pat, in one of our first or second classes, you know, people love that, like, you know, kind of, you know, CNN, Fox, MSNBC, you know, pratter, but it's not real.
Right. No, and you know, what you put your finger on is another set of factors in that social media that really, really complicate.
And the poor Republicans, if you want to be a moderate, you're just like, you know, labeled. It's awful. You know, it's awful. You know, it's like, oh, you're not conservative enough. It's like, so it's kind of it really is on both sides. I didn't mean to say just on one side.
Yeah.
I guess I keep wondering if, we were having this on the chat, and I know we talked about this earlier, but it does feel like the extreme gerrymandering is exacerbating the death of any moderate. So if you've got districts drawn really heavily liberal, really heavy conservative, there is absolutely no check by the voters saying, I want a more moderate candidate. It's just whomever shows up on the RD side, they're going to vote for. And so it seems like there's no check when you've got these districts that are drawn heavily one way or the other, is that you're going to get a super liberal person or a super conservative, and there's no check by the voters in those districts. I feel like that's somehow, as well as the proliferation of misinformation through social media and all the media outlets, like how do you fix that?
Yeah, and I think in an earlier session I pointed out that it's more than just gerrymandering. There's certainly gerrymandering, and there are reasons to you know, go along with what Common Cause wants, and that's to put in place citizen redistricting commissions. But they will face challenges because Democrats and Republicans are now residentially segregated. And so it's hard. You're going to have to be more creative than in the past. And then, I mean, the whole notion was that you would have districts that thought of themselves as a community. Okay, so that it would be easier for me as a representative to represent my district. It'd be easier to understand what they preferred. Okay. Well, that's going to fly right in face of the fact that Democrats are largely in cities and Republicans are in rural areas. Okay, so you want to redraw the district lines and have an urban rural kind of thing. We'll that's going to be hard for that representative to do their job. And it's just a situation that we as a nation haven't faced until now. We've never had this degree of residential segregation. It's also why we now, in the last few elections, keep getting these just loopy disjunctions between the popular vote and electoral vote. And nobody with power, nobody influential, and I know that's kind of where you were going, is talking about dealing with those sorts of forces and recognizing the ramifications. So
it's constitutionally protected. Like the Supreme Court did rule, though, right? That they're allowed to do it. At least that's what I remember from Sean's class.
But they're allowed to.
That gerrymandering was the states have the right? The state legislature.
But for districting, but they can give that responsibility to a citizen board.
Right.
And there are a number of states that have done that. Unfortunately, it's been with a couple of notable exceptions. Arizona is kind of an exception, although Arizona is becoming more competitive, but it's Democratic states that have done it. And that's not where the recent gerrymanders are really occurring.
But I think there's a more fundamental thing, and there's no easy way to fix this, but and it has to do with sort of how the country was set up. And we talked about this earlier about the fact that each state has 2 senators. Right. So really, I would argue the Congress, especially the Senate, and you can say, well, it wasn't set up that way, but I don't think it works anymore. The Congress, it's not representing the people. The Senate doesn't represent proportionally the people, right? So if I live in Vermont, I'm much more powerful than if I live in New York or California. I mean, it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
So it's not the will of the people. And we understand why that compromise was made when the country was founded. But it's completely skewing. Anyway.
Yeah.
And there's no fix to that, right? Because nobody's gonna address that because they're like, what?
Well,
I don't understand it.
It's really hard. It's really hard to address it because it's a little bit like asking every member of the U.S. Senate to commit suicide.
Yeah.
End your career right now.
You have the more Republican people.
You could add senators, right?
The more conservatives on this call are all going boo.
Yeah, but we're talking about representative government. We're talking about the government is supposed to represent
we gotta finish up, but
people, right?
Yeah.
And the people, and so it doesn't.
Yeah, but
it gives some people more of a voice. I'm not talking Democrats, Republicans. I'm just talking policy.
Yeah,
they have a stronger voice. It's not fair, and I don't think that the reason it was set up, those reasons are valid anymore.
Then I think that's where you have to go, because it's not as though there weren't reasons. And the additional thing is that folks can really. What was that?
I'm just giving her a shout out.
Oh. There can be disagreements about what the reasons actually were.
But what's the point now? How does it serve our democracy now? I don't see how it does.
Okay, well, so let me
I
do
understand
this.
there's a history, but where are we now and where do we need to go?
Well, in a
And
sense,
what
I
is
already
the
gave it.
point in letting some
I
people
already
have
gave it
more
to
of
you.
a voice than others?
I already
Yeah.
gave it to you. And the reason is that they believed, and you know what? I'm going to make a real strong argument here. I still have doubts about the Senate and about the Electoral College, but I'm going to make the strong argument about the Senate. If you want to see the primary principle that has led us to get stuck with Donald Trump, it is democracy. All of the elements that used to exist, that were those aristocratic elements that the framers put in, get swept away, and everything is done in this way that's sort of superficially democratic. The framers were really schooled in Greek and Roman political thought, and they always worried about demagoguery. When it came to democracy, the danger is demagoguery. Someone who's incredibly persuasive and can emotionally manipulate. Y'all get it? We started out with the public doesn't know anything, and they react and they respond to politics emotionally. Let me put it in a really direct way about Trump. If you let the Republican National Committee decide who is going to receive the Republican nomination for president in 2016, Donald Trump would have been at the bottom of their list. I know, because I had a student who was interning at the RNC, and she told me how angry and upset and terrified they were. Okay? So it's not as though more democracy will solve these problems necessarily. Okay? It's harder than that. And it's also kind of seeing a way out of this current situation, so that then you can talk more intelligently and productively about what direction that you go. But does that make, I mean, I guarantee you, the Republican National Committee, no way in hell were they going to support Donald Trump. Not at all. They would have made a far more responsible decision than ordinary Republican primary voters. Far more responsible. There is not a political scientist in the nation who would disagree with that judgment. Not one. Okay? So just saying all we need to do is represent the people, maybe not. You know, at the very least, let's think about the ways in which we represent people and be thoughtful and careful about how we do that. Cool. My goodness, I got clap. I got applause.
Oh yeah. Although in the chat box we're all saying again depressing.
and so I will again say, and that's what I'm here for.
All right. Well, thanks as always, Pat. Thanks everybody for joining.